Hello, everybody. This is Georgianne Hughes, and this is The Bite Show. And we're very blessed to have Olaf Hage with us. He is a premier researcher. He presents the news behind current world events, and he is a researcher of biblical and ancient history studies. Please visit his website. It is TheTimeQuest.com. All run together. TheTimeQuest.com. And tonight we have a very intriguing subject. And I'm going to say that this file is christened Time Bandits. And I'm going to let Olaf tell you about it. This is really very, very interesting material. Hi, Olaf.
Hi, Georgianne.
Oh, boy. You with possible storms and large hail, and oh, my goodness.
No, I've asked the Lord to hold that off. Hopefully he will, but you never know with these things.
I know.
I may have to pause for a moment, so I will, at a moment's notice, or little notice, I will say, I need a break here for a second, and we'll go close the windows up so we can keep our glass from breaking.
Yes.
But the question before the house is, and this is a really appropriate time to do this.
Yes.
What time is it? Now, if you ask that question, most people will look at their watch. And the first thing I would observe is, if you say it's 10:30 or 3:42 or 6:17, or however picky you want to be, 6:17 and 32 seconds on my mark. Yes,
Yeah.
Get smart, No matter how precise you think you're being about time, we have been told lately that there are annual leap seconds that have to be inserted.
Yeah.
At your watch, no matter how precise that little quartz crystal might be, it ain't precise enough.
Wow.
And that time isn't really what you think it is. How can there be a leap second? Is it a year? Is it an hour, or a day? Well, of course, the year is how long it takes us to go around the sun. And if that's changing, if we're drifting away from the sun or closer to it or whatever on average, if the time it takes to get around the sun varies, then they have to adjust the length of the year. So there's a leap second. Or another thing that could occur is if the number of days in the year is varied by something that doesn't work out quite right. You've got leap year days and so forth, and every 400 years we skip a leap year. I never get that one right. I always screw that up. I called up Steve Quayle one time before 2000 and got it backwards, which I'm sure impressed him no end. But anyway, there are all of these little complicated quirks in our calendar, which Pope Gregory and a bunch of scientists in the 1600s figured out. That was the days of some pretty smart guys, but not very precise guys. So it's worked out rather well considering, but we still need leap seconds. And the summer is when we're closest to the sun, right?
Right.
Wrong.
No.
Right now we're as far away from the sun as we can get. We're actually in early July. The Earth is as far away from the sun as it is in its whole orbit. July 2nd, technically, and this is July 3rd, so we're like the day after. The closest approach to the sun that we can have is in December. Actually, it's in early January 2nd. And the farthest away we get is about July 2nd. Well, you say, well, that's backwards. Not if you live in Australia. You see, it's about which direction you're tilted. We're tilted away from the sun in winter and toward the sun in summer in the northern hemisphere. But the reverse is true in the southern hemisphere. So if you live in Buenos Aires, if you live in, Melbourne, if you live in Christchurch or some of these places down under there, you are going to have your closest approach to the sun at the height of summer. And that's why, if you look at those places, it's very hot.
Yeah.
They're hotter than we are in the summer. And because they're literally tilted toward the sun when the Earth is closest to the sun, and tilted away from it, having their winter when we're having our summer, so their winters are milder. Excuse me, did I get that wrong? No, their winters should be colder. I don't know what their winters are like. I've never been to Australia. I go down there during the winter just to see what's happening. Or maybe I can just Google it or something. But in other words, time, just on the Earth itself, the seasons are relative. What you think is winter here, well, it's not winter in Buenos Aires. What you think is summer here is winter in Buenos Aires. So right now it's really cold down there. They're going through winter. And it's like January there. So if you hear about a snowstorm in Buenos Aires this week, well, duh, of course.
Yeah.
It's the middle of winter. It's like January there, only there, it's still July. So that's part of the problem. Then we have precession of the equinoxes, which means that gradually the tilt, and you understand precession of the equinoxes has nothing to do with the Earth's orbit. It has nothing to do with how far away from the sun we are. It has nothing to do with solar activity or the planets or where the galaxy is relative to the sun or any of that stuff. It has to do with the fact that this tilt of the Earth's axis toward or away from the sun wobbles really slowly. It takes about 26,000 years to slowly, like a top, wobbling on its base, to spin around and point at a different part of the heavens, and therefore the North Pole star of the heavens is going to move from Polaris at the end of the Little Dipper. It's going to swing all the way around a big circle in the sky to Vega, or some other star, Draco was Alpha star Thuban, or some of these other stars up in the heavens. Now, that circle that it makes, you don't have to worry about it because it's going to take 12,000 years to get to the other end of the circle, so it's moving real slow. But it does move. And because it's moving, the signs of the zodiac are slowly, very, very slowly drifting with them. And it takes about 2,000 years to drift one full sign in the precessional circle. Now, that one full sign will result in our being tilted away from the sun at a different point in our orbit, and therefore a month away, 2,000 years away, if you follow me. So instead of the summer solstice falling on June 21st or 22nd, it would fall on, depending which direction you go in the precessional circle, either July 22nd or May 22nd, depending upon, as I say, which direction you were looking forward or backward in time, a little over 2,000 years. Now, the exact number, according to the Greeks, was 2,160 years, but if you do it according to current scientific calculation, I think it's 2,158 and a fraction. So, it's about 2,160 years. It's close enough for approximation. Now, 2,160 years means that the sun will enter the sign of Aquarius at the spring equinox, that is on March 21st. It would theoretically, if we allowed the calendar to drift and allowed the calendar to be stuck to the signs of the heavens, you see. If, in other words, if Aries and Cancer and all those things remained where the signs of Aries and Cancer are in the stars of the heavens, why, then the calendar would switch with it if we attached all of these things together, see. Well, Pope Gregory and all of these guys, they decided, we don't want to do that. We want to lock it in. And back Julius Caesar and his people, they decided to lock it in. So they want to keep March, for some odd reason, they wanted to keep March 21st the date of the summer solstice, even though the stars in the background, even though everything else in the universe was moving, we want to keep March where March is, because they wanted to keep the Roman pagan feast days falling in line with the seasons of the sun, winter, summer, and so forth, as measured in the northern hemisphere from Rome. You following this logic so far?
Yeah.
So the time bandits operated back in the days of Julius Caesar, and they said, well, we're going to just steal time, and we're going to move it. We're going to change the times of the seasons, just as prophesied in the book of Daniel. Mm. We're going to think to change the times of the seasons, and we're going to shift everything and attach it to our pagan Roman feast day calendar.
Yeah, that's pretty arrogant to those guys.
Yeah, well, it's very arrogant, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, here's what they did. And they did it badly. Just as Julius Caesar was being assassinated, and I don't mean the very minute, but about that time in history, there were a bunch of guys from Egypt that he'd brought with Cleopatra to Rome with him. And they were wise men. And they had some charts and various things, and they were setting up a new calendar. Well, when Caesar's assassinated, Cleopatra was only there, along with her wise men, because Caesar was alive and well and protecting her. But his wife, Calpurnia, wasn't fond of Cleopatra, the mistress.
Right.
Gee, I wonder why. And, so as a result, or as the Romans would say, Calpurnia. But anyway, so what she did was she asked some of her friends in the Senate, other people, she said, kick her out. I don't want her here. Take her advisors with her. I don't want them. So she talks just like Rush Limbaugh imitating John McCain. And so Calpurnia got Cleopatra kicked out, and along with her, and Calpurnia, by the way, was the priest of the good goddess, or the Bona Dea. So she was a priestess. She was she had some power, and so she got Cleopatra sent home along with her advisors, and they were the guys who knew how to do the calculations properly. Well, the half-instructed, half-educated Roman astrologers and court chronographers didn't quite understand what it was they were explaining to them about leap years.
Yeah.
So they sat down and they started to put in a leap year every 3 years.
Oh, boy.
Just like me not being able to advise Steve Quayle exactly correctly. They couldn't quite get their calendar quite correct, so they were putting leap years in every 3 years. And they were just throwing them in, just as fast as they could. And pretty soon they noticed there's something wrong here, because this calendar seems to be off a couple of days. Winter should be starting. And they began to realize that the solstices weren't coming when they were supposed to, which was December 21st. Nothing was happening exactly where it was supposed to. So they thought, well, something's wrong. Well, by the time Octavian had become Caesar Augustus in 27 B.C., they hadn't noticed it yet. By 20 B.C., and by 17 B.C., when he celebrated his 10th year of his reign, nobody had noticed it. But as he got ready to celebrate his 20th anniversary in office, and they were making preparations for all the celebrations and so forth, they started to look and they said, we seem to be off by at least 2 or 3 days. We think we're off by at least 3 days on the calendar. Something's wrong here. We think the calendar should be a leap year every 4 days. So Caesar Augustus said something like, take care of it. And so they had to issue a new calendar, and they had to tell everybody, okay, tear those pictures of Pamela Anderson off your wall. We got to start all over again. We got to have a new calendar here. And so, or Cleopatra, whoever was on the wall there in those days. So they got rid of all their old calendars, and they started with new calendars, new dates on them. Now, of course, when they had first put this calendar in, back in 46 B.C., they had to figure out how to take care of all of the days that their calendar had gotten out of sync from what it should have been, according to their pagan feast day calendar. And so they actually had a single year that was over 400 days long.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, they did. They had it was this big, long verschlungener year that they just threw in there, and they added a whole bunch of extra months to it. It was just a big mess. But after that was over, they started in on their 365-day year. You know, they started it so they could have their year begin the way it was. They had reckoned it to start. Now, it turns out that apparently the upper culmination of the Egyptian star Sirius that honors Isis, which, of course, I guess Cleopatra was probably a priestess of Isis or something, as was the wife of Joseph, the patriarch in the Bible in Genesis. But if you know what an upper culmination is, it's the highest point that star reaches above the horizon. And today, on January 1st, December 31st, New Year's night, when the people are celebrating Happy New Year and blowing horns and kissing each other and all that sort of stuff, drinking the champagne, just above them in the sky is the star Sirius, as high as it's going to get all year long. I don't think that's a coincidence. But anyway, so it is the brightest star in the sky, not as bright as the planet Jupiter or Venus can get, or even, I guess, Mars on some occasions. But it is nevertheless the brightest of the fixed stars. Now, it's about 9.8 light years away. It's not terribly far away. It's pretty close as stars go. There aren't too many closer than that. Barnard's star, of course, the stars in the southern hemisphere, you can see are pretty close. But anyway, so what these guys were doing is they were trying to reset the calendar in a way that was supposed to please the pagan festal calendar, but I think secretly was intended to honor the Egyptian goddess Isis. You see where I'm going with this?
Yes.
The Egyptians hijacked the calendar in order for the Romans to hijack the calendar. So we got two sets of time bandits here. And now Augustus wants to celebrate his 20th anniversary of being declared official emperor. And the first one actually to be called emperor, because before him, Caesar sort of took the title, but the Senate didn't officially confer it. They got really iffy about that, and I think they used some knives to drive their point home.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, so anyway, so Augustus ordered this calendar change, and the change was this. Okay, no leap years for the next 16 years. And so from 8 BC to 8 AD, which is actually 16 years, but not as a crow flies. There's no 0 year, but it actually is 16 years if you include both 8s, okay? In that time period there were no leap years while they were trying to get the calendar back in sync so that they could start the leap year every 4-year routine. Now, this little detail of history just happens to coincide with the time that Jesus was born. So, and this is something that even Dr. Ernest Martin didn't notice, something that I stumbled across, and I realized, this could throw us off, and it could create a problem. And if you look at the Hebrew calendar date for the birth of Jesus, which I've worked out in great, excruciating detail, I've got a little bit of my research up on the website. Or if you look at Ernest Martin's work, he's written some books on it, The Star That Astonished the World, The Birth of Christ Recalculated, and so forth. You will find really fine arguments in there, for the most part, to show you that Jesus was born on September 10th, 11th. Now, he was only born on one of those days, obviously. But the Hebrew calendar starts at sunset and ends at sunset. That's the biblical calendar reckoning, okay? So when it talks about a day, it's starting at sunset and it's ending at sunset. And we think of the day as beginning at either sunrise, because that's when we wake up, or whenever we wake up anyway, or starting at midnight, if you want to go to the technical calendar date. And so, as a consequence, when we think of time, we have this arbitrary moment of midnight, which makes it now July 4th, as I noticed it, where suddenly it's another day, and nothing's really changed. The sun hasn't done anything interesting. The earth hasn't done anything interesting. But technically, it's midnight according to our clock. And the clock tells us that another day is there. And our calendar tells us that, because our calendars are reckoned midnight to midnight. So, we have three different ways of looking at time here. Is a day when you wake up? Is a day when the sun sets? Is that when it begins? Or does it begin in the middle of the night? Or does it begin at sunrise, the way the ancient pagans reckoned it? Hey, there's four different ways to reckon it, okay? And you can use Greenwich Mean Universal Time recalculated according to the Julian calendar twice removed or something, and then you get a slightly different time. Or, there are just all kinds of things. There's leap time, and there's regular time, and there's all kinds of stuff. Very complicated, which tells you one little thing. It's arbitrary. Whatever guys want to decide it to be at a particular time, they can fiddle with time.
Yeah.
They're not really changing time. They're changing the calendar that is supposed to tell us what time is.
Yeah.
And they're changing the clock by a leap second or whatever. And so it gets really odd out there. Now, this is a little complicated, so I'm going to do this step by step. In 8 BC, they began skipping leap years, and they skipped them on down through 8 AD. Jesus was born, according to Dr. Ernest L. Martin's reckoning, in 3 BC, and I have gone over that about 20 times and proven him right 6 ways from Sunday. It was absolutely 3 BC. But when he originally wrote, he thought it was 2 BC, and he revised it with further research, okay, which is good, because he would have been wrong if he had said 2 BC.
Yeah.
And the reason we know it's 3 BC is from multiple lines of reasoning. I'm not going to go through all of that here, because we could do a whole bunch of files on just that one subject alone. It's right on my first CD, so if you want to know about that, it's right on the very first CD. But and there's also a free page up on the website if you don't want to buy CDs. There's a page right there on my website that discusses it. So here in brief is what we know. All the early church fathers, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, 5th century, gave us times and dates for when they thought Jesus was born. But you see, they lived in different parts of the Roman Empire and beyond its borders. And each of those places had a different calendar because they reckoned it by the local king's reign. It was in the 3rd year of Darius the 15th or something, And so everybody had their own little local calendar. And then when they called something the autumn or the harvest, well, the local harvest varies from place to place. A harvest in, say, Germany was a lot sooner, say maybe August, and a harvest in say, North Africa, or a harvest in, say, Babylon would be closer to, say, October. Maybe November, depends. So depending on how warm it was, how far north you were, the time of the harvest was a different time. So you have to look at the references in these specific ancient sources differently. Each one is, they're not all the same. For example, if something says November, well, got to be careful, because are they saying November according to the time when Jesus was born? Because November means the 9th month. That's what the word November means in Latin, the 9th month. So, was it the 9th month? Then exactly when was the 9th month? You follow me?
Yeah.
Because after that time, after Jesus was born, they honored Augustus by creating a new month called August, and they stuck it in before November, moving November forward a month, And they also stuck in a month for Julius Caesar called July, and that moved it forward another month. So what they called November at the time Jesus was born was actually September. See the point? So you have an early church father who said Jesus was born in November.
Oh, gee.
Well, he was. At the time he was born, it was called November. But it's not called November now. It's called September now. You see? Now, the day, we have Babylonian New Moon tablets inscribed by Magi, the Magi.
Yes.
They put the inscriptions down of what the new moons were that were cited at the time, and the full moons and so forth, and they designated the months of the year. And they were very heavily under the influence of a large Jewish population that lived in Babylon at the time and was very powerful and influential. And in fact, some of the high priests at that very time and some of the chief priests under them came from Babylon. And some, of course, at the very time Jesus was born, the priest was from Egypt. He was from Alexandria. Yeah. That was Simeon Boethus. But just before him, they were Babylonian priests, and right after his time, there were a few more priests of his family, and then the Babylonian priests took over again. And when Jesus was crucified, they were in power. Now, when I say Babylonian, I'm talking about the Jewish community in Babylon and the Jewish community in Alexandria that were in exile in those two cities. They were so powerful that they literally had a huge influence over what kind of political condition was taking place in Jerusalem. And that's well understandable when you think about the fact that for a long time the power center was in Babylon. There was no power center in Jerusalem. It was occupied by Edomites. People had come up there from Petra and from Edom to take over the land, as it says after they were set off in the Babylonian exile. So when they came back to the land, Ezra has a big problem. People had married Edomite women, and you have to get them divorced, and all that sort of thing. So eventually they cleaned up their act, and they took back control of Jerusalem. But by that time, it was about 420 BC or so, by the time they get things worked out. And so, they were still basically under these Babylonians, such as Ezra, such as Nehemiah. They were Babylonians, you see. Now, they were Jewish people living in Babylon. But what I mean by them being Babylonians, they're not pagans. They're not of Babylonian descent. A lot of people get confused about this. I hear some really silly nonsense out there, people thinking that the Jewish priests were taken over by pagan Babylonian priests who came to Jerusalem. No. They are Levites from Babylon who had their genealogies perfect, or they wouldn't be allowed to be priests, or even enter the temple, or even put their hands on the stones to rebuild the temple, okay? They were really picky about this, and this is all in your Bible. You go back and read Ezra and Nehemiah, it's all in there. So these guys they're looking for a way to control what's going on in Jerusalem, because they feel like Jerusalem is this little baby that they've planted back in the Holy Lands, and they're kind of nurturing it and helping it to grow back up, you see. So when Ezra and Nehemiah come back there, they see people intermarrying with the local Edomite women, and they say, no, you're going to have to divorce those women. You guys, look, we're going to play the daddy. You're going to be a little child. We're going to tell you how to live. We're coming from Babylon here with the true Levitical law, which has been handed down unbroken in our true Levitical descent, which is documented and provable. And we got our certificates and our genealogies to prove it. And so we're the real McCoy. You guys aren't. You guys are just hanging around here, twiddling your thumbs, waiting for us to bring the true law back to you. Here's the Torah and so forth. And so they read it. They go through all of that. You can read that in Ezra and Nehemiah. It's all well documented there. Also in Chronicles. So here they are imposing, if you will, the influence of Babylon on the country. And they get the thing settled. And they get settled in the land. and more people come back to the Holy Land because conditions in Babylon are really great. It's a beautiful place, and it's very nice there, well watered by the Euphrates. But conditions over in Jerusalem were very poor. People cried when they saw the first rebuilt temple, the so-called Second Temple. They cried after they came back from Babylon, and they started to see what a mess Jerusalem was. It was still in a state of devastation. The Edomites hadn't really fixed the place up. They were sort of they were the guys who come and kind of trash the house, and they leave all the TV dinners lying around, all the dirty trays of the TV dinner had been in, and they didn't throw it in the garbage, and they got their dirty socks on the floor. And so that's kind of the condition they left Jerusalem in. They didn't build up anything. They didn't repair anything. They left it in a mess. And so when people started to come from Babylon to see the rebuilt temple, they were really disappointed. And literally, it says they would cry. They would weep over it because it was such a shadow of what they expected. So Jerusalem took a long time to recover and rebuild. And it wasn't until the days of King Herod, which is the days of Augustus Caesar, that they actually rebuilt the temple and rebuilt the city of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. And Herod is the guy who actually took it from this rather decrepit state of half rebuilt and sort of a rather clumsy attempt at rebuilding and turned it into a beautiful city that was the envy of the world. Herod did that, okay? Whatever else you want to think. Now, there's an Edomite who actually cared something about appearances, you see.
Yeah.
So he put some effort into it. But you see, by then the Edomites had converted to Judaism, or at least John Hyrcanus had forced them to convert about the same time that Julius Caesar was born, around 100 BC. So now all of a sudden, Jerusalem's the place to be. So now people from Babylon are just flocking back to Jerusalem. Well, now Jerusalem is a garden spot, They didn't want to go back and rebuild it themselves. They had to wait till an Edomite came in and actually rebuild it for them, which is a real shameful thing when you consider how much the Edomites had trashed it previously, and they used to look down on them, and now suddenly here was an Edomite king making the place look good. So that really was a comeuppance for these Israelites who were in exile in Babylon. So they come back now just before the time of Jesus, and they're looking at the city, and they're saying, wow, you see. So we have this big Babylonian influence coming back, and so Herod says, well, okay, who's the guy in Babylon who has a right to be king? Because we got these Hasmoneans, these members of the family of the Maccabees. We got them sort of making themselves high priests, and we don't really accept them as the real proper line. It's the line of Zadok, the house of Zadok, that should be the high priestly family line, and not the Hasmonean family. They were a different course of the priesthood, and David had not given them the high priesthood. So they said, well, David gave it to Zadok. Let's find Zadok in Babylon, because these are the people who are the big magoo, they're the hot stuff. So they go and they find some of these guys, and they bring them in the family of Adonel, which became the family of Ananus, which is the guy who was father-in-law to Caiaphas when Jesus was crucified. These guys come in from Babylon, and they bring with them, of course, a very Babylonian point of view, which is, well, we know better than the people in Jerusalem. We know better than these people who are living under an Edomite king. We have the true Israelite descendancy, and we have preserved the law intact, and we are the people of Ezra and Nehemiah. You imagine the attitude these guys had. Well, when Jesus was born, there was another group who were also the line of Zadok, who had been exiled to Egypt, and they were in Alexandria, and they were from a higher high priestly line. These were the guys before the Maccabees. These were the guys who were the last survivors of the original Zadokite line, or Sadducee, if you prefer that pronunciation, in Jerusalem. And so this was a higher Zadokite line. When Herod realizes that he's made a mistake in picking the Zadok line from Babylon, a lesser line, he says, well, okay, what am I going to do here? So he cuts the baby in half. What he does is there are four chief priests. There's the high priest, there's the captain of the temple, who's his sort of vice president, takes over if he's indisposed, has charge over the spear. And then there is the treasurer of the temple, or Amarkin. He's the guy who has charge over the gold and silver vessels of the temple. And then finally there's the overseer of the temple. He has charge over the anointing box, and he gets to anoint the new high priest. Except, of course, they didn't have the anointing box. Magi had it. But Daniel had given it to them, and they still had it, you see. So they haven't anointed any of these high priests, and they haven't anointed Herod. Nobody could get anointed by the overseers of the temple because they didn't have the anointing oil. So they go for this long period of time without anybody being anointed. And this is actually in the Talmud. This is a fact of history. You don't have to trust me on this. So anyway, you try to picture this now. The Romans are changing the calendar over in Rome. Jesus is being born over in the Holy Land. Okay? So they're counting what? The number of years of Augustus's reign. Well, wait a second here. Did it begin in, say, 44 BC when Caesar was assassinated? Well, no, because you had Mark Antony and Octavian ruling together for a while. Well, did it begin in 31 BC when Mark Antony was defeated in the civil war between the two? Well, no. Okay, was it when Augustus, and as Octavian became declared Augustus or emperor in 27 BC? Well, okay, maybe there. You see, but you see, there's three possibilities, and then there's Herod the Great. When did he start to rule? Well, it's not quite clear. Some people say that you reckon it at 40 BC. Some say 37. Some say 36. Some say 34. So these guys who reckon the birth of Jesus by the years of the reign of a certain king or a certain emperor gets a little mushy. Every year on December 31st, the Catholic Church has a midnight mass. The Pope, whoever he happens to be that year, is reciting this little chronology, and is about when Jesus was born. And it says in the something or something year of something or something in the what do they call it, the Greek thing, the Olympiad, which Olympiad, and so forth and so on. And they give you all of these things. Sounds like they really know, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what year do you think they're referring to when they give you all that stuff?
I don't know.
3 BC. And that's the amazing thing. The church actually remembers the correct year.
Huh.
And every year when you hear that, if you sit down and you get your calendar out, you do a little chart there and so forth, you're going to discover that they're declaring that Jesus was born in 3 BC. And I was amazed one year. I just sat down and counted it and said, gee, I always assumed it would come out to 1 BC, December 25th, 1 BC. But no, it doesn't. And so I thought, whoa, the public doesn't realize there's a 2-year discrepancy between what the church believes and what the calendar says. I think we got another time bandit out there somewhere in the woodwork.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, you see. So the church is reckoning 3 BC. And you look at all the early church writings, all those church fathers I mentioned, the first several centuries of the church,
yeah.
And they got different harvest, November, this, that, the other thing, which, could be September, and, it's kind of fuzzy. The year they give is interesting. When you chart the different years they give, they range between 4. See, typically their years don't begin on January 1st. They're years that begin in the spring or the fall or something like that, of a certain king's reign, or maybe on the day that king took power in the first year of that reign and so forth. So they're very different in each case. But the one thing they all have in common, the one time they all overlap, is September of 3 BC. They all overlap there, except for the guy who said November, which, if you followed me before, could actually be, and it actually was what we now call September. So the likelihood is, just on the basis of the historical evidence outside of the Bible, if you looked at nothing else, you would say September of 3 BC. The church information, you would say December of 3 BC. But again, if you ask the church, how do you know Jesus was born on December 25th? Their official response is, oh, no. We don't know when he was born in that year. We just choose to celebrate his birth on the 25th of December as a convenience, because in the early church, this was a time when Christians had rest from pagan persecutions. Oh, okay. And why did they have rest from persecution? Because that was when they were celebrating the birth of Osiris and Dionysius and Bacchus and all of the other sun gods who were reckoned to be born 3 days after the winter solstice on December 21st. You've seen the picture yet. All right, so the church says, well, we just arbitrarily picked this day because this is this day. Okay, well, it isn't quite so arbitrary. Turns out that because the pagans were waiting for the first sunrise, where the sun was visibly moving north again, rising a little further to the north, and therefore the days were going to get a little longer in the winter. So on December 21st, it's right in the middle of this period of about 5 or 6 days where the sun seems to set, rise, and set for that matter, at exactly the same spot. It's east versus west. So in the east, where they're looking at the sunrise, it's like, I don't know, it looks about the same as it did yesterday on the 22nd of December or the 23rd of December. I can't quite tell. It's sort of the same place. You see, it's sort of stuck there. It seems to have come to rest at that spot. It's not moving at all. It's just sort of rising in the same spot every day. That's why they call it a solstice or resting spot. That's why the solstice is the solstice, you see. It seems to stay in the same place for several days in terms of where it's rising and where it's setting. So the sun seems sort of stuck. And so at that spot, they reckon that the old sun has sort of died and a new solar cycle or year has begun. And then they count forward. They reckon that from the middle of this period of stasis or solstice. Sol, stasis, sun, still. And at this particular spot in the middle of these 6 days or so where it doesn't seem to be moving much. So the 22nd, nah. 23rd, nah. Sunrise, 24th, sort of, kind of, but we're not sure. And at midnight, that night, the 24th into the 25th, with the Catholic Midnight Mass we were talking about just a moment ago, at that point, they start lighting candles. You notice the candle lighting ceremony at the Catholic Midnight Mass? And they start lighting the candles, which signify the rebirth of the sun god, the birth of the light. Get it? Lighting candles.
Yeah.
And they start to have a little parade. They're going to go marching out to the sunrise in the morning, And so at midnight, they reckon that is the darkest time of the year. And the moment when something magical is happening, of course, nothing magical is happening, but that was the pagans, how you find magic in every little thing. And so they took this to the extreme of saying that at midnight was the moment that there was a rebirth of the sun god. Pick your own name for the sun god. There's all kinds of sun gods out there. Horus, Osiris, Dionysius, Bacchus, long list of these guys, Mithra, so forth. And at sunrise, they then waited. They gathered to watch for the sunrise. Sounds like a bunch of Christians, doesn't it? They gathered to await the sunrise. And when they saw the sun come up, they all celebrated and sang hymns to the rising sun, because that was the moment that assured them that the sun was coming up a little further to the north. They could visibly see it on that day, the 25th. And they would exchange gifts and make merry and get drunk. And they would get drunk for the next 8 days, the next week, ending on January 1st. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
And so here they are. And while they're doing that, the Christians would celebrate December 25th as the beginning of a series of days when they didn't have to worry about being persecuted. So So that's what that story is about. But it has nothing to do with the exact day Jesus was born. It is simply giving us a rough indication that Jesus was born sometime toward the end of the year 3 B.C. But you know what? The church did remember the exact day. I can prove it to you. Remember what I said about that calendar being screwed up?
Yes.
Well, those leap days, they knocked off about 2 of them by skipping them, okay? Which means that when Jesus was born, even though it was the evening of the 10th, the day that goes into September 11th, okay? Even though that was the exact time, sundown at the 10th, the beginning of that day that goes into, most of which is on what we would call September 11th, so we normally nominally call the birth of Jesus September 11th. So if it's the morning of September 11th, say 2001, it's the same day as in this calendar reckoning of the Hebrew calendar as the evening before at sundown when Jesus was born. So it's actually the birthday of Jesus, September 11th. See what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
So even though he was actually born on the 10th the night before. So now follow this for a second. You go back at the time, if you had a calendar on the wall, Calpurnia or Cleopatra or somebody, lying on a couch there on the top of it, and then there are the days marked off and everything, the day that you were looking at would not have been September 10th or 11th. It probably would have been September 8th. Because, you see, they're skipping the leap years. They had to issue special calendars. So if they had a calendar on the wall, and I'm not saying they did, who knows, maybe somebody did, prepare his calendar hanging from the wall. But if they did, it would have been September 8th on that calendar. And the guy at the census thing, when they came to the Romans to register all these guys, and they're writing down everything, and they want to find out when this kid is born and so forth, they want to take that down and write it in the official record.
Yeah.
They would have written down the date at the time, which would correspond to September 8th. So, by the time that the church in the 4th century starts to pick a day for the birth of Jesus, they have this old feast lying around that nobody can find the origin of, and it's still there on the calendar. You can still find it in the Catholic liturgy. September 8th, the Nativity of Mary. They assumed, because nobody knew where it had come from, that September 8th, the Nativity of Mary, referred to the birth of Mary, not the birth of Jesus, by Mary. See the problem?
Yes.
They jumped to a false conclusion. But it's right there in their own liturgical calendar to this day. So September 8th, 3 B.C., by their calendar, which because they were screwing up the leap years is actually September 10th by our calendar. I know this is so simple. But anyway, and September 11th, the morning of September 11th, when the attack on the World Trade Center occurred, that's all the birth of Jesus Day. Okay? That's all Jesus' birthday, except for one little problem. Jesus was born according to the Hebrew calendar, not the Roman calendar. So that's the day we would reckon if our calendar had been in use on the day Jesus was born. That would be where the sun tropical calendar day would be. Because remember, Julius Caesar wanted to fix the calendar to the solar seasons.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the solar season moment that Jesus was born. Okay. But according to the biblical reckoning, you have to look at the moon cycle, where the moon was, and the lunar days on God's sacred calendar. That's a whole different kettle of fish. And that kettle of fish is made complicated by the fact that in the 4th century, gee, where have I heard that century before?
Yeah.
The Jewish rabbis under Hillel II got together because Julian the Apostate had decided to really throw a monkey's wrench into the religion of the empire because he was a pagan. he wanted to get the Jews and the Christians all fighting with each other. He wanted to use the Jews to balance the Christians in terms of the power of the empire, so that the pagans could kind of watch you and him fight and then emerge victor. Mm-hmm. So what he did was he patted the Jews on the back basically and says, "Hey, you guys, you haven't had a temple lately. Why don't you go rebuild your temple? I'll give you all the money you need, and we'll protect you from all those pesky Christians who might want to try to stop you." Over there, and of course the Christians didn't try to stop them at all. But anyway, the Jews went over there. They tried to rebuild the temple, and God stopped it. He had ball lightning come up out of the ground, and workers were knocked down, and there were strange earthquakes and all kinds of things. Christian, Jewish, and pagan authors all confirm that that's what happened when they tried to rebuild the temple between 361 and 363 AD. So while they're trying to rebuild the temple, Hillel II and his guys are trying to come up with a new calendar. Oh gosh, if we're going to have a new temple, we're going to have feasts, we're going to have sacrifices, we're going to have people having to go back to Jerusalem every year. You see the point?
Yes.
Oh, we need a new calendar. Only, well, we want to make sure that this calendar is not going to be messed up by somebody in some distant country having the wrong idea and so forth. So because Jews have become so dispersed, they decided to create a kind of an artificial, mathematically calculated calendar. Forget all of that looking at the new moon stuff. We're going to throw that out. We're going to sit down and we're going to calculate a calendar. We're going to figure out what we would like the calendar to be. And while they're thinking about it, with Julia and the apostate kind of in the background saying, "Remember who's financing your temple for you. Could you do me a favor, guys? I want you to rig this calendar so that the Christians don't have any support in your calendar. Can you fix that?" "What do you mean?" "Well, they're always talking about how Jesus was born on the first day of the sixth month, and how all of these things fit together and fulfill prophecy, and the crucifixion on Passover and all that stuff. Couldn't you kind of, sort of, okay, we'll see what we can do." So they come up with a calendar which actually changes the natural lunar cycle calendar that you would get by looking at the moon, so that it's actually foreshortened by a few days, so that the day when Jesus was crucified can never be the Passover anymore. The day when Jesus was born can never be in the sixth month anymore. It can only be in the seventh month. In other words, it changes all of the cycles. A little bit here, a little bit there. It's like a nip and a tuck, and it just sort of, getting back to Pam Anderson again here, but it just sort of changed the whole shape of the calendar. It made it, it sort of seems the same, not the same. At Pentecost, well, that's a Sunday, right? Not to the Jews anymore. Since the 4th century, Pentecost has fallen on the 6th day of Sivan, I think it's. So they've put it on a fixed day on the calendar. So it doesn't fall on a Sunday, except occasionally, once every 7 years on average. So you see what's going on here?
Oh, yes.
If the Jews have a new calendar, okay? Now, the Christians are getting a new calendar at the same time, because their calendar starts to get paganized. They are adopting December 25th. They're adopting all of these other dates that are basically to please the pagans, please the emperor, to please all of the new patrician pagans who've come into the church with all their money and power, and they're now kind of telling everybody how to run the church. So, and that's literally true, by the way. That was all happening in the 4th century.
Wasn't there something like 25,000 patricians that converted at the same time on the same day?
There were 600 leading families.
Well, and it was to save their lands. If wasn't it, Olaf? If they would convert, the Romans would let them keep their property. It was something like that.
Yeah, in the year 394, the 600 leading families. Now, families got a lot of people in it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this is thousands of people. The exact number is unknown. But the 600 leading pagan families, I guess representatives from the 600 families, we have the 400, the elite blue blood 400 in New England. Well, they had the 600 leading blue blood patrician Roman families, and they had been pagans and holding out and financing and fighting wars against the Christians for the better part of that century since Constantine came in. And they finally said, basically, well, okay, you Christians have become pagan enough for us.
Yeah, gee.
So in the year 394, after their last attempt at revolt in 392, that was defeated. And so they finally said, all right, we're tired of trying to take over the empire again by force. We tried it by the Julian apostate, a guy who pretended to be a Christian till he got into office and then suddenly revealed himself for what he really was, Barack Obama. And so he was, did somebody say? But there's this thing where people thought, he was a Christian till he became emperor. And that was part of their strategy. They had a whole bunch of these. They actually had a whole bunch of Christian bishops and priests and monsignors and stuff going to church councils and making church law who were actually secret pagans.
Yeah.
And when Julian came in, a lot of these guys admitted who they were, and and a few holdouts still kind of waited because Julian didn't quite consolidate his power right away, and then he suddenly died young. So it was a good thing they waited. So he was only in office about 2-3 years, and there was this period of history where the pagans and the Christians were warring against each other, and the pagans were trying every little trick they could think of to regain power in the empire. They literally tried everything you could imagine. And they eventually, they literally were rewriting church laws and creating a new church calendar in part, or helping to change the calendar, let's put it that way. And so by the time 394 rolls around, the patricians get together, and these 600 guys must have met, reps of the families, at some big convention. And they said, look, this isn't working. Maybe the last-ditch effort here that we can have is suppose we all join at once. And we're rich, we're powerful, we have a lot of influence. If we all join at once, maybe we can kind of push the church from the inside to where we want it to go. Okay, so they had seen for about, at that point, 30 years, they had seen various pagan bishops. These are men who were born pagan and who suddenly became bishop, jumped from paganism to bishop overnight.
Yeah.
Rose of Milan, for example. And Jerome was a guy who was born a pagan. Augustine was born a pagan. These were all new converts, okay, who are now called the doctors of the church.
Yeah.
Excuse me? When was the last time brand new, wet behind the ear novice converts become the doctors of your church? Isn't it the guys who were the elders who were already there who should be the doctors of the church? But you see, right at the end of the 4th century, these new pagan converts take over the church. And the difference between the Christian church, I should say, at the beginning of the 4th century and the end of the 4th century can be summed up in 3 observations. Number 1, they got a different calendar.
Yeah.
Number 2, they're ruled by pagan Christians who were new converts instead of Jewish Christians who are the son of Jewish Christians who are the son of Jewish Christians going back. And number 3, it's ruled by people who've never been persecuted instead of ruled by people who can't remember not being persecuted. So if you think about it, you have these Jewish Christians who've been persecuted by pagan Romans who, at the beginning of the 4th century, are running the church with a calendar that's basically Hebraic, basically a Jewish calendar.
Yeah.
The old one before Hillel II comes along, okay, which they're using to interpret the events in the life of Jesus. And then you go back to the end of the 4th century, or I should go forward to the end of the 4th century. My time is out of whack here. You go forward to the end of the 4th century, and now you've got recent converts who are pagans at heart, Neoplatonists and pagans, who are following a whole new kind of calendar, with the Jews following a different calendar, and you just follow it, you just see the two calendars diverging. They were the same calendar at the beginning of the 4th century, but the Jews moved off in one direction, and the Catholics moved off in the other direction. And the calendars became divergent. They were keeping a different Pentecost, they were celebrating a different Passover or Paschal season, and so forth. And you can actually look at the writings from the 4th century and see how the Christians are beginning to say anti-Semitic things for the first time. And they are saying them in response, well, actually, it's coming out of the mouths of the pagan converts to Christianity, because a Jewish Christian is not going to say something anti-Semitic, but a pagan Christian would, because he inherited it from pagan Rome, brought it into the church, you see, with them. So they brought in their calendars, their feasts, their pagan days. There are literally hundreds of pagan shrines and basilicas and holy places around Europe and North Africa that are today Christian churches or Catholic or Orthodox churches. Think about it. And that all happened in the 4th century. They just converted them. So the pagan who, at the beginning of the 4th century, went in and saw Isis holding the baby Horus, he shrine to Osiris, now walks into a shrine to Jesus, and there is Mary holding the baby Jesus. But it's the same statue, in the same building, and it's the same pagans and the same family, and they're celebrating it on the same days. So, that's how things. So again, time bandits. People are stealing the original calendar. Now you get to the 6th, 7th century. There's a guy named Dionysius Exiguus. 6th century. It's actually the year I think 539 or so. 533, 539, 530. Nobody's quite sure. I've seen so many different dates for Dionysius. It's ridiculous. But somewhere in that decade, roughly from 530 to 540. Okay? Now, what would that be? In simple terms, it's the 500th anniversary of the crucifixion. And so at about that time, he issues a new calendar. And in his calendar, he's trying to calculate when Jesus was born. And there is this story that Jesus was, like Alexander, when he died, 33 years old. And the tradition was that Jesus was, there were certain events that took place 15 years after the ascension of Jesus that were recorded in history, which were calculated back, and they thought meant that Jesus was crucified in 33 AD, which we now know is not possible. We know that couldn't have been the correct year. But there was a little tradition that grew up around 33 for a bunch of silly reasons, but it was an easy mistake for them to make. He counts back from 33 AD to, you guessed it, December 25th, 1 BC. And that's what he then declares to be 1 BC. He has Jesus born, a week before the AD period. So that's how he sets up his calendar. And he creates the BC AD differential. So until 533 AD, probably, you did not have this calendar that we now enjoy. And, of course, it had to be revised again in the days of the 17th century, in the days of Pope Gregory, because it was off by 11 days by then because they had allowed the leap year thing to get out of whack. And because every fourth year is fine as long as you don't do it too long, because there's a quarter of a little day that gets screwed up in there, and over the course of time, over a century or two, you begin to notice that you're off by another year. So by the 17th century or the 1600s, Pope Gregory had to call his people together. I think it was 1682 or something, and they had to come up with a change to fix the calendar. And the change was that they would skip the leap year. They make a gross adjustment of 11 days, and they would also make a change in the course of the what do you call it, the century mark, the century year. They would skip one of those leap years, or 3 out of 4, or whatever it was. I forget. I got it wrong, whatever it was. So there are all these little changes that were made, and what they allow is now that we got it almost down to like leap seconds per year. Okay, so we're doing pretty good, but a long time to get to where we are. The trouble is, when you and I start talking about when Jesus was born, well, in the year he was born a month and 10 days, or 40 days, before Yom Kippur. And the reason we know that is because Luke's gospel tells us that Anna, the prophetess, was in the temple fasting and praying and not leaving day and night. Well, there actually is only one day a year when she could do that. So he doesn't mean every day and every night. He means just for that day and night, because it was illegal for a woman to be in the temple 24/7, just if only because of her menstrual cycle. She couldn't do that. She wasn't a shopping bag lady or shopping cart lady living in the temple all the time. She was actually a prominent, wealthy widow, and she just was there as a woman who wanted to show her penance and everything. She was there for Yom Kippur. Women were required to be there on Yom Kippur. She just chose to be there. So on Yom Kippur was the one night a year when they left the temple open all night long for people to come in for the overnight fast, which is the only overnight fast in the calendar, and to pray overnight in the temple, and the only overnight temple service in the calendar, the only time the temple was left open overnight. So we know that this is the end of that day. Remember, the days end at sunset. So this is near sunset at the end of the 10th day of the 7th month, Yom Kippur. Easy. Now, you go back to the beginning of that chapter of Luke, and it says that they brought the child there and did according to the law of Moses, turtle dove and a young pigeon. Well, that would tell us what that day would have been. We could go back and see where that is in the law of Moses. You've got to look it up. It's in Leviticus, and you go back and you check it out, and you see it. If you got a Bible marginal reference, you can see it there. It'll give you the exact verse. And you'll notice that it's a series of things that you have to count. First, you got the kid circumcised. Then you count another 33 days, and so forth. Well, now, if you add up 8 days plus 33, you get 41 days, right? But that's not the way Jews do things. If you're going to circumcise a kid, you don't wait till the end of the 8th day. No, he could die. Something could go wrong. God forbid a tornado strikes. You don't take chances. They come, and the rabbi, the guy comes and he does the circumcision at the end of the 7th day, just at the very beginning of the 8th day, okay? And then you count your 33 days, okay? And when you get to the 33rd day, you don't wait till the end of the 30th day. God forbid you should have a heart attack, something should go wrong. You don't wait. You do it at the beginning of the 33rd day. So technically, when you add it all up, it isn't 41 days. It's 39. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, if you start from the end of the 10th day of the 7th month and you count backwards, the day you arrive at is the first day of the 6th month of the Hebrew calendar, which is the month of Elul, E-L-U-L, okay, the month of Elul. Nobody thinks of, what's that month? I never heard of that month. Tishri, I've heard of. Elul, who's that? Well, that's the month before Tishri. It's the month before the New Year. Okay, now I know Ernest Martin, a lot of people are all excited about the idea that Jesus might have been born on Rosh Hashanah. And it's a wonderful idea, and I'm happy for them, but it's not true. The law of Moses locks in the date that Jesus was born at the first day of the 6th month. Okay, there's no way you can get around that. However, today the rabbis celebrate it. That is the first of Elul, when it corresponds to the time when Jesus was born, as the first day of the 7th month. They celebrate Rosh Hashanah on that day now. Go figure. So the amazing thing is they're blowing trumpets, they're celebrating New Year. Jesus is born on that day. Who knew that the Jews would be celebrating the birth of Jesus so dramatically? I mean, certainly they didn't know. But anyway, back on the first day of the 6th month at sunset, and we know that because it says that there were shepherds keeping watch over their flocks by night, and they went and they told people that the angels had told him that this child is born that night. So the people were still awake, so it had to be really early in the evening. So it gives you a really narrow window of opportunity, somewhere between sunset and maybe an hour after sunset, not much longer than that. So it must have been very close to the actual new moon moment that Jesus was born, the actual day of the new moon, okay, when that little sliver was seen there in the sky. Well, Ernest Martin discovered, you look at the book of Revelation, and lo and behold, there is the astrological picture of the exact moment when Jesus was born, with the sliver of the new moon beneath the feet of the woman, the only woman in the zodiac that has the sun on it, which is Virgo, the virgin, giving birth to a child, okay, and the sun is mid-bodied to her, and the moon beneath his feet. That actually, and by the way, that makes her upside down with her feet in the air, like she's giving birth. Hello? And that actual moment there, that is described in the year 3 BC, is September 10th. So, and indeed, if you go to the Babylonian New Moon calendar, and I've got it, and you look at it, that day is first day of the 6th month, first day of Elul. So it exactly corresponds. Everything fits perfectly. The Magi over in Babylon would have recorded it correctly. And they were Jewish Magi, by the way. We want to worship him who is born king of the Jews. Okay, they obviously were. Can you imagine what the pagan king of Babylon would have thought of that?
Yeah.
But anyway, so there's a clear indication that Jesus isn't born when we think he was born. And so now let's look at the Muslim calendar briefly. September 11th. What day is that? Well, in the Muslim calendar, some people say that that's when Muhammad was born. Well, not so fast. It turns out the Muslim calendar swings 11 days every year, and that it takes 33 years for the Muslim calendar to go all the way around, and it lands on a different day on our calendar. Mm-hmm. So it takes a long time, centuries, for the same day to fall in their calendar as it does in our calendar and so forth. So nobody really knows when Muhammad was born. You go look it up in an encyclopedia or whatever, they don't have any idea. I mean, they just speculate. They think they know the year. But the exact date of his birth is a matter of great dispute and controversy. Now, he's a real person. He really was born. We just are not quite clear because of the calendar change. Now, did the calendar change the century that he died, which would be the 7th century A.D.? Well, so if it did, okay, then we have a problem, because there's a plaque on the Dome of the Rock over there in Jerusalem that says that the Dome of the Rock was built in the 72nd year of the Hijra, which was B 622, which is when the Hijra, or the flight of Muhammad, the Mecca flight. So if you reckon from 622 and you add 72 years, are they lunar years or are they solar years? Well, if they're lunar years, then the Muslim calendar, I mean, theoretically you could argue that it would have been 691. But if you add 72 of our years, then it's 694. You see the difference here? Now, would the Muslims actually reckon that 3 years didn't occur? Because you see, the plaque was written to welcome Jews and Christians and others to the Dome of the Rock. Would they have told them a date that would have made no sense to them? You see the point?
Yeah.
I think that the scholars have it wrong. I think that the Dome of the Rock was actually completed in 694, not 691. The plaque on it was not intended to be read by the Muslims alone. It was intended to be read by everybody, and it wouldn't have made a whole lot of sense if it meant 72 lunar months, or 72 times 12 lunar months. Okay? So I think that that's because there are 13 lunar months in a year, approximately, shy 11 days. So I think what they were doing here was they were telling the average person would show up, this is what the date would be. So we live in a world where nothing is the way we think it is.
Boy, that's the truth.
You think you were born in the sign of Cancer, you're probably a Gemini. True. Absolutely true. when they show an astrological chart, they say this is the time when Cancer begins, on June 21st, and it goes to July 22nd or whatever it is. No, it doesn't. Not in the stars, it doesn't. That's just the solar seasonal cycle, and all that measures is where the Earth's axis is tilted toward. Does that affect people's birth or life at all? So far as we know, not at all. But the center of the Milky Way galaxy can cause earthquakes, they know.
Yes.
Okay? There's a lot of gravitational impact from that. So that's moved a month or 28 days from where it was in 150 or so AD when Ptolemy established the current zodiacal relationships and dates. So therefore, we're off 28 days in our astrological calendars. They're 28 days from where the signs are actually located. Where the stars of the signs are actually located.
Yeah.
So if you think you were born in Aries, chances are you're not in Aries, you're a Pisces. If you think you are a Leo, you may very well be a Cancerian or moon child. If you think you're a Libra, you might actually be a Virgo. And a lot of times people will look at the predictions in the astrological books and so forth, and they'll say, that doesn't sound like me. And then they'll look at the preceding one, and they'll say, gee, that one kind of fits.
Yeah.
So there does seem to be some personality effect of the gravitational pull of the center of the galaxy on the child as it's born relative to where all the planets are. It seems like there's some sort of gravitational matrix that may have some influence over what kind of personality you have. Maybe you become more irritable if you're born in certain types of situations or whatever. We'll never figure it out, though, if they don't get their calendar.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Are the victims of time bandits. They have robbed us of everything you can think of. We can't tell when Jesus was born without a whole lot of hard work. We can't tell what day it is or what time it is. All these people with all their different political or religious vested interests have fiddled with all of this stuff and made a mess of it.
Yes.
As in the book of Daniel, when this all began under Julius Caesar. There will come a man, an understander of secrets, which is what Julius Caesar was. He was a priest, an understander of mysteries, who will think to change the times and the seasons. And that's where it all started. Hence, Jesus was able to say to the apostles, he's going to come back on a day you do not know and an hour you don't expect him.
No fooling. I mean, several times I've said to you when we've been talking, how do we know really what day it is?
That's right.
Yeah.
Hard to tell.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
Very complicated. And you can see from all the complications I had to go through just to explain why it's complicated.
Oh, gee, Olaf. Oh, it is complicated. And I really, really have had that suspicion since I was a child. Somebody will say, well, you have to go here on Monday at a certain time, and I was, how do they know it's really Monday?
And why 7 days and so forth? The Romans actually had a 10-day week for a while.
The what did?
The Romans, the ancient pagan Romans before Julius Caesar had a 10-day week.
What was that, a 10-day work week?
Well, it was 3 10-day weeks per month.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, well, yeah, you're right. A 10-day week, they got a little extra work out of people each month.
Yeah, well, don't even talk about it. Somebody will hear that and take it to their boss and say, oh.
Senator Warner of Virginia will add that one to his 55-mile-an-hour bill. Yeah.
Oh, gee, what a bunch of jokers. Oh, Olaf.
You see, I tell people that I know when Jesus was born.
Yeah.
Arrive at that knowledge overnight.
Yeah.
It's taken me, I started studying this, 78, my goodness, 33 years ago.
Yeah.
It's taken a third of a century I've spent looking into this, and I've gone back over every time somebody sends me some little piece of information I wasn't aware of before, I'll go back and redo the whole thing to see how it fits in and so forth.
Yeah.
And so it is complicated. I've looked at all the alternative theories, September 15th, Rosh Hashanah, all of the other theories, And, of course, there's one idiot out there who thinks it was in the spring, which is impossible, of course. And, I've looked at all of these theories, and I've looked at their evidence or lack thereof, and examined all of these theories. And when I arrived at the final date, and then started to recheck it almost annually ever since, ever since I got the correct date, now all the new information always confirms it. I don't have any problem with it.
Mm-hmm.
And Ernest and I had the same basic date, but he thought, because he was going by the current Jewish calendar, he didn't realize the calendar change had occurred. He thought it was on the first day of the 7th month. Mm-hmm. But other than that, we had the same agreement. And you can see how even Ernest Martin, he's a great guy, brilliant man. But
very brilliant.
Yeah, even Ernest can make a mistake on that.
Sure.
And, these things are complicated. They're very, very difficult. And Ernest and I were kind of uncertain about it, the crucifixion going between 30 and 31. And I finally was able to find some clues to pin it down to 31. That was a difficult job. And to April 26th, which you will discover was a Thursday. But that's another story for another time. Actually, I got a whole webpage on that issue as well. But that was another surprise because, there were people saying Wednesday, and people saying Friday. Nobody was saying Thursday.
Yeah.
And so when I realized it was a Thursday, that all the information lined up with Thursday, I thought, that can't be right. I was raised in a Catholic church, man. It's Good Friday. Everybody knows that. Well, maybe everybody overlooked a whole bunch of Bible passages and were staring them in the face. It didn't make any sense. How can it be the third day he's raised from the dead? How can he be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth? I digress. You can go on and on with this stuff. All the dates are screwed up.
Yeah, exactly.
It's Feast of the Ascension. It wasn't Ascension Thursday. It was Ascension Friday. And it's plainly stated right there in the book of Acts, right there when it's talking about it. And people just read right by it. It says it's a Sabbath day journey. Gee, it was the eve of the Sabbath.
Yeah.
So it's Friday. It's not Thursday. It's not Thursday morning. It's Friday evening. And, it doesn't matter. People can't count. They don't bother to do the math. They don't bother to make charts. That's a simple thing to do is just sit down and make a chart of it.
Yeah.
I once had to send Ernest a chart, Dr. Martin a chart, showing we were arguing over some little point and so forth that crossed the BC-AD date. And I said, I think you're off by a year. And I actually charted out every single year and counted them off and sent him the chart so he could see it, he could see why he was off by a year. Because it's so hard to think across that missing 0 year that isn't there. Ask Glenn Kimball, who misses it all the time.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of people. He thinks Jesus was 40 years old at the crucifixion. But actually, according to the dates he's picked, he's got him born in 7 BC and crucified in 33 AD, 2 impossible years. But don't worry about that because he thinks he has to be 40 years old. But he's including the 0 year that isn't there. So he's actually proving that, he's not proving. He's actually arguing.
He's a wacko.
That Jesus was 39 years old, even though his argument starts from the premise that he was 40, and then he goes back and calculates the birth and death dates on the basis of the 40-year assumption.
Yeah.
And it's all screwed up. So he's not a very good source for this because he doesn't really do his homework. He just says he does.
Yeah.
Big difference, trust me, folks, between doing 33 years worth of homework and just saying you're doing the work.
That's right.
You've got to actually sit down and calculate all of this and check all the sources. And to do a really thorough job means you have to be thorough, meaning you know all of the evidence and checked all of the evidence.
Right.
Okay. It's been years since anybody's been able to tell me anything new about this that I didn't already know. Which doesn't mean there isn't some little piece of evidence out there, but it isn't going to change anything at this point because there's so many facts that are locking it in. And the same thing now with the crucifixion. I've got a ton of evidence that points to that day in 31. And the reason I reconstructed all of this is because so many of the other dates of history are locked into those. You've got to have a foundation stone, Christ is our foundation, in which you can begin to construct your chronological dates for other events that are tied prophetically to the life of Jesus. So when you have people in the year 2000 who are getting ready, and an author sent me their book to endorse, which I couldn't, and I had to write back to her and say, no, I'm sorry, I can't because it's not true. But they were arguing for the birth of Jesus, the 2000th anniversary being in the year 2000. And I said, no, the correct 2000th anniversary was in 1998. You've already missed it.
Yeah.
And so, but you see, and people say 1998. No, you mean 1997 because it was 3 BC. No 0 year. Remember? So you got to, so you lose a year. See how hard it is? I mean, everything that you think is true isn't true. You think you're a certain sign, you're not born under that sign. You think that that things happened on a certain day. No, they didn't. So much of the chronological history of the New Testament, of our own time, of so many events, is messed up. So when 9/11 occurred, 2001, was it the birthday of Jesus or wasn't it? Well, yes and no. Technically, that year it was celebrated on the Hebrew calendar. God's calendar would have been celebrated, I guess, in August or something. It depends on how you want to look at it. Was it the birthday of Muhammad? Maybe, maybe not. I think it's just an internet rumor, that gets started. I haven't been able to find any substantiation for that. God knows when Jesus was born. He knows when Muhammad was born. Okay? But the one thing I know for sure, it was the 100th anniversary of the time when William McKinley lay dying of an assassin's bullet from an assassin who was a Muslim, by the way, back in 1901. And so the nation was going through a similar trial and upheaval, and they thought he was going to be okay until around the 11th of September of 1901, when he suddenly took a turn for the worse, and a few days later, on September 14th, he died. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's an interesting anniversary date. There seem to be some anniversary elements there, but do you think the Muslims were thinking about that? I mean, after all, they had assassinated McKinley because they were angry about what we did in the Philippines and how we persecuted Islam in the Philippines when we took it over after the Spanish-American War, and we appointed as a governor William Howard Taft, the son of Alonzo Taft, the co-founder of the Skull and Bones Society. Mm-hmm. So he's the son of the co-founder of the Skull and Bones Society, and the president on 2001 was the son of a member of the Skull and Bones Society.
Oh, gee.
Who knows? Maybe that's what the Muslims were thinking. You never know.
Olaf, give out your information about your CDs.
Yeah, the CDs, you go to the website before 2012 and beyond.com. All one word, before, 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 2012 AND BEYOND, all one word, before 2012 and beyond.com. And you'll see, as soon as you get there, you'll see something about Olaf CDs. Click on that. It'll take you there. There's one at the top. If you don't see it on the right side, there's one at the top. They're my distributor for the CDs, and they have the CDs there. And you can become a distributor, too. I mean, just email me or email them, and they'll be happy to sign you up and so forth and tell you what to do. We have CD subscription. You can get each month's CD, which contains 12 hours, which is a whole bunch of my tapes. The very first one's got the birth of Jesus on it, the New Testament blotted out. It's got a whole bunch of fascinating stuff about Mars, all kinds of interesting things. I try to put something about Mars on every CD. I consider that dessert for you. So the last file on each one is like that. But there's about 12 hours on each one, 11 and a half to 12 and a half. Average is 12. You can get the first 6 CDs as a set. You want to catch up to where the subscribers are. Or you can buy the first 7 or 8 as a set if you want to catch up. Actually, the subscribers, I think, are getting 9 So, and then starting with number 7, you not only get that, but you also get a bonus CD, which has up-to-date material that I just recorded the bonus CD here for a new one. And so those are ongoing things. That's there's an hour and a half, plus there's an eyes-only file, which is about an hour, so there's at least 2.5 hours on a bonus audio file there. And then we've got, and there'll be more as we go forward with the subscriptions. We're going to be adding additional stuff to that bonus CD for subscribers only. Only subscribers can get that. And then only subscribers can get the data CD, which is something you put in your computer, and you get a print file and charts, graphs, illustrations, all kinds of visual stuff that I do in what we call the For Your Eyes Only series, which I can't talk about because it's for your eyes only. It's a secret. But is it worth it, Georgianne?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
If you think the stuff I'm talking about on the air live is borderline stuff, wait till you hear what's in that material.
Well, I wouldn't call it borderline. I would call it...
well, stuff that most people wouldn't dare talk about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, this is stuff nobody would even think to dare to talk about.
Yeah, but most people haven't dug as deeply as you have, Olaf.
Yes, I have spent an awful lot of time on this.
And most people are digging in the wrong spot.
I know, indeed. Yeah. We're digging in the wrong places there.
Yeah, they're digging, but they're not digging in the right spot.
And they're using the wrong calendar to dig there.
Yeah, no fooling.
Yeah, so they're not getting it. You got to have your calendar right. You've got to understand who these people really are.
Yeah.
That poor fisherman who owned $1 million worth of fishing boats. You know,
yeah.
Well, maybe he wasn't so poor. You got to know who these people are. And, people, they don't use their common sense. I mean, if you own a fleet of fishing boats today, would you be poor? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you owned a fleet of fishing boats on the Sea of Galilee and had a monopoly on all the fishing in the Sea of Galilee, you and the family you had married into, which is Peter's family, and so Zebedee and Jonah, the two parents of about half the apostles there, or 4 of them anyway, those guys owned basically the fishing industry on the Sea of Galilee, and they had a whole bunch of fishing boats.
We've got to close, Olaf. And I hate to because...
I know.
This is so interesting. But anyway, everybody, do go and get the CDs that Olaf has available. Go to his website, theTimeQuest.com. You can write to Olaf Hage at Post Office Box 427 in Brunswick, Maine. And the abbreviation for Maine is ME. The zip code is 04011.
And by the way, they can send a check or money order to me at that address for $49 and start the subscription that way.
Yeah.
If they can't afford to keep it going every month, whenever they can afford it, they can send it.
Yeah.
I'll get 12 hours worth of stuff.
You'll fix them up. It'll be okay.
Okay.
Yeah. This is Georgianne Hughes with Olaf Hage signing off tonight. God bless every one of you out there listening. Good night, everybody.